really on the show usually, so I'm just here in case anything melts down.
Boy, you have a fantastic radio voice, though, so you should be on the show. Your voice is incredible.
Well, thank you for saying so. I do some other shows that we make on the
Hmm.
site.
Uh-huh.
Um, this one I just record though.
Okay.
Yeah, and he interjects sometimes, and he's
Yeah,
always
sometimes
welcome
I
to.
interject if it's just too juicy and I can't keep my mouth shut. I'll
Right.
jump in.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, before we start, Dave, did we get the timer fixed
What
for
was
the
wrong
tonight
with it?
challenge? That we didn't have one?
I've got something.
Okay,
There's a
either
little-
that or I can just put a timer on my iPhone real quick. And
Yeah, I got one. I think we didn't we do one where I had like a thing that made it had a ticking sound and then you heard a big alarm buzzer
I
thing
just-
at the end.
Nope.
Okay.
Were you just playing one? Because I was just hearing some.
Yeah, I
ticking.
played some ticking. I just played the top of that sample to make sure it was gonna work. So
Yeah.
yeah, I gotcha.
Okay.
All right. You ready, Ben? I'll roll in the audio.
I'm ready.
All right. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Ben Furman.
I'm gonna roll in the audio.
All right.
Yeah, I promise we've done this before.
We're totally professionals.
I thought you were doing that in post again. Yeah.
Now when I'm here, we do it live,
Mhm.
like Bill O'Reilly. And in 3, 2.
Hi, I'm Ben Furman.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
And this is Patch In, the wonderful show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. NAMM has just ended, so let's start off with some talk about products. Keith McMillan, who creates some of my favorite gear, has introduced a new project called the K-Mix. It is a programmable mixer control and 8x10 audio interface offering 96K at 24-bit for all of you who are looking for interfaces. It has built-in effects, and more than anything else, though, and why I want this, it's a surround sound encoder and diffusion system for $600, and it has all of their crazy touch controls with tons and tons of LEDs. I want one.
Holy cow! Is it colorful and so pretty? This mix. So it's a mixer. It's an audio interface, as Ben said. It can be a control surface for programming whatever digital audio workstation you use. But in addition to those two things, it can be a standalone mixer without the use of a computer at all. And that's particularly intriguing to me, to have it play all these roles in such a glorious package.
I hear you. My Mackie's getting a little old and in desperate need of new caps, so
Exactly.
rather than tearing it apart again, I might just have to wait for this to come out.
Sounds about right to me too. So speaking of new caps and knobs and awesome things, Moog Modular, holy cow! They've got these amazing, like real big deal analog systems. System 55, System 35, and Model 15. They're released like they look like the real thing from the 60s and 70s, but you can buy them new now. It's pretty amazing.
And they are slightly cheaper than Moog's update of Keith Emerson's synth from last year.
Mhm.
So nothing is going to cost over 6 figures this time.
Yeah.
Speaking of Moog, though, they've also released an update to the firmware for their popular TheraMini Theremin. If you have one, as I do, you will want to download this and install it. Basically, it allows you to configure your theremin similar to a standard ether wave, so that all of the knobs are mapped out as if they were a standard theremin, and you can control things like the calibration and the volume just by twisting knobs. Also, and this is something they're not really talking about too much that they need to, I have found that personally it really, really helps with how linear the instrument is. So you're no longer going from here to here for a half step. Now it's here to here to here to here to here. And everything works in a much more linear fashion when you've got that mode enabled.
Mm-hmm. And taking a step back, we were talking about interfaces from Keith McMillan. Focusrite has some really awesome new Claret. I might be pronouncing that right. The Claret range, a new series of interfaces. They're all operating on Thunderbolt. So for connecting to your Mac, they've got a lot of ins and outs, high quality preamps, and everything else. You should check it out.
Yeah. And they've also updated their Red plugins to now run on AAX format, so Pro Tools 10 and up, you can use it on there. And with Pro Tools comes the update of Pro Tools to version 12. It's coming, and they're not saying a ton on their website, but from what I've read in press releases, it includes cloud storage so that you can save your sessions to the cloud and collaborate online with other Pro Tools 12 users. It has a new purchase model similar to what Max MSP did with version 7, in that you can buy a monthly license, you can buy a yearly license, or you can just buy the program outright. So the fears that they were going to be doing nothing but monthly subscriptions appear to be overblown for now. They are also heavily plugging the new Avid Marketplace as a way to buy plugins, add extra features to the program, or to share tracks, or even to do quick recording sessions for someone else's track. So say I'm in one town and I need to do a mandolin track for Nate's session, I can now do that and sell it to him.
For cheap, hopefully. We're friends, right? You know.
Well, hopefully, but if you want cheap, they are introducing a new free version called Pro Tools First. There is very little information out on this, but more will be coming soon. Avid.com, of course, will keep you updated on that.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to Pro Tools going back to the free model as well. I know they used to have it, and I remember reading about Tape Op. Bands like Deerhoof used to, like, with no budget, make, like, with a couple of old MacBooks, make their whole album with the free version of Pro Tools and release it to the public. And hopefully we'll be able to see something in the indie scene in that way again. Speaking of cool independent projects, Teenage Engineering, I haven't heard of this project or this group before, but super cool OP-1 synth and a couple other synths in this Pocket Operator. They're really affordable. They're super tiny. Like, there's a picture of the guy holding it in his hand. It's like a pocket calculator or something. You should check it out. Synthtopia has a great write-up on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really do look like old-school pocket calculators that you would have in a math class. So for all of you high school musicians out there, this is a great way to pretend that you're doing something productive in school when in reality you're making your next track.
Mm-hmm.
But today we are joined with a very special guest, and one that we've wanted to have on the show for a while. He is a Dickerson Emeritus Professor at the University of California at Santa Cruz, a pianist, cellist, and composer with over 70 published works, 20 books, including works of fiction and short stories, and any number of articles. His works explore anything from microtonality to traditional tonality to algorithmic composition, but he is best known for the Experiments in Musical Intelligence, or EMI, and EMI's successor, Emily Howell. We are joined today, of course, by David Cope. Welcome.
I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah.
So, I have actually read your book, Techniques of the Contemporary Composer. In fact, that was my first sort of compositional textbook, an introduction to things beyond the realm of what I learned in traditional music theory. But beyond that, you have gone very far in creating artificial intelligence programs that use the rules of traditional theory. And it's very interesting to me that they are able to put out the output that they do in the way that they do. So can you talk a little bit about EMI and how that came to be?
Okay, well, it came to be because I had a commission to create an opera and had my first so-called composer's block. And I became very interested in the possibility of using what I already knew at that point, the amount I already knew about AI and programming, because I was a programmer at that point as well, in trying to compose the opera using a computer rather than my own mind. I'll try to make this short. Basically, I failed miserably at it. Random produces interesting random sounds, but certainly not music in my style. So I immediately came up against this ogre, if you will, in front of me, that I had to create something that at least vaguely sounded like my music. Mm-hmm. And I decided to create a database of my music, and then from that database have the computer program analyze the salient details and then produce new music in the style of that database without actually, recreating one of the pieces that I used in that database. That took me about 6 or 7 years in the 80s to produce some output that I felt was respectable. Interestingly, along the way, though, and more pertinent to your question, was the fact that I didn't know much about my style. I'd never spent time trying to actually figure out what it was I did. I composed like other people, fairly intuitively. And thus I decided to see if I couldn't, capture another composer's style, a more traditional composer's style, particularly a dead composer's style, because I didn't want to get sued by anybody if I was successful. And then so I worked on Bach primarily for a number of years, and most of this was by putting in 5 numbers for each pitch in a composition by hand. At that particular point, there were no downloads of MIDI files from the internet or anything like that. Yeah. And so I spent a lot of work on this. I'm quite an obsessive person, and in this case, I was quite obsessive. So I created a database of Bach, worked at it for a while, worked on the analysis thing, because EMI is more analysis than it is composition in reality. Once the analysis was done, it produced music, and by God, it sounded very much like Bach, at least to my ears. And since I've been teaching Bach at the college level for at least 30 years to that point, I felt I was fairly good at determining whether something sounded like somebody or not. And it was actually the Bach pieces that caught people's attention more than the completion of the opera, which after 7 years took about 20 minutes to compose using my program with computers. So it actually worked out really neat. And so that's basically the reason I got into the process, and then because the output was so conflicting to people, that I felt that, well, if I was pissing them off with that, why couldn't I piss them off with some other composers as well? Because I tend to, as a teacher, my job as a teacher, I always thought was to fundamentally piss people off, students in particular, to get them to think. Mm-hmm. And thus off I went with 35 classical dead composers producing more and more music all the time, and over the years it became very controversial, which made me happy as a jaybird, and I was thrilled with for some reason I am somebody who really loves to agitate, not physically but mentally, to get myself and others to think, and thus the more negative reviews, the more antagonism I produced, the happier in fact that I was. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm jabbering now, so I'll go back to your. Did I answer your question?
Oh, definitely. Could you talk a little bit about what did it come up with that sounded like Bach? How do you describe it as being Bach-like?
Well, by the time it started making sounds, MIDI was around, and I was able to produce sound right away. Previous to that, I would just take it to my piano and play the music after writing it all out. What does? Well, fundamentally, every composer, no matter who he or she is, uses a set of constraints, a set of rules, whether they're aware of it or not. Even Cage, well, maybe Cage most of all, used rules. He was more rule-ridden than anybody else. He would but he would just devise the rules for a particular piece of music, you know, the tossing of a coin or whatever, but staying strictly with the results, the chance results from that. But other composers, every composer uses rules, whether they admit it or not, whether they're even aware of it or not, as I wasn't aware of my rules. So you have these set of rules, you tend to follow them, you break out of them every once in a while when you get a special idea or write a work for a new ensemble. And those rules are in the music, basically, fundamentally. And my program was, you know, I designed the program to ferret out those rules and then use the rules themselves, not the music, but the rules that were derived from that music to create new music in the style of the original.
Interesting. So you say that the software that you've made, it learns, or it's able to decipher the rules from the notes in addition to then using the rules to generate new music?
Exactly.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, and it's all what I call data-driven. That is, none of my software, any of the number of programs that I've created, is always built on the fact that you have the larger the better amount of data, and that data serves fundamentally as the source of everything. And the program actually is small compared to the amount of data used in most cases. And again, the more data the better, because the less data you have, the more likely the program will actually produce something sounding like that data. And you don't want it to sound like the data, you want it to sound in the style of the data, but yet different.
Interesting.
So how many pieces are you putting into Emmy or Emily in order to get a result that sounds very similar to Bach? I mean, he has thousands and thousands of pieces and chorales available.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you sat down and actually input every single one of them.
I did.
Oh.
No, not the thousands. I input originally the 300 and I think it's 365, somewhere around there, chorales in a particular book that's used for college theory courses.
Yep, Riemenschneider, 371 chorales.
Exactly, 371 chorales, exactly. And the Riemenschneider collection of Bach chorales. And I put in about 300 of them, note by note by note. I got to know them pretty well, actually, in the process. Because, again, it was 5 numbers for each pitch that had to be placed in. Now, of course, you can go up to the internet and just download the whole bunch of them and have them available for this. But again, in the early days, I didn't have that, so that took some time.
Now, one thing I have to wonder is, as you were creating this, did you run into any issues with the output that stylistically it was close to Bach, but that it would approach some sort of static motion, or that it would start getting exponentially more and more away from the style and start to get, I don't know, I'm thinking kind of in terms of waveforms where there's a tendency towards stasis or a tendency towards some exponential curve away from the original area that they start out at.
Right. Well, the thing is, too, mathematically in this regard, this program is designed to capture not only the, shall we say, beat-to-beat rules or the phrase-to-phrase rules, but the form rules of a composition. In other words, there's a hierarchical level here where at the top you're talking about a chorale which has let's say an ABA form or something like that, where you have a subject developed bit and then another subject and then a return to the original, and all the way down to this note goes to that note Y, and now there are parallel fifths and there are not parallel fifths and things like that, which are present in the style of Bach chorale writing. And so as small as I declare the analysis engine of the program, it's still pretty large. It's not large compared to the numbers that exist in the database.
Right.
But it produces chorales from beginning to end, and each chorale is different because they choose the only random part of this is a choice of what chord to begin with.
Hmm.
And if you start off with by chance the same chord beginning two, next to one another created Bach chorales, there's a chance they might sound more or less alike. But still, there would be diversity
Right.
in that process.
Yeah, there would definitely be differences. I mean, not just in terms of the spacing of the chord, but also the voice leading would have similar rules, but there might be the occasional need to break one of those rules in order to avoid parallels or anything similar with chromaticism or anything.
Well, interestingly enough, we teach Bach as not having parallel fifths and parallel octaves, when in fact Bach does have quite a number
Oh
in
yeah.
the hundreds of parallel fifths and parallel octaves. He had not set down a paper, instructions on what rules to follow. He was doing this, mostly by ear and by intuition, and and in fact, one could make the case that the breaking of the rules that Bach does is what makes the difference between a Bach chorale and a student Bach chorale. Because a student's been told not to break those rules,
Right.
and there's many rules you can't break. Bach was never told that, and so once in a while he has them, and they don't stand out. They're musical and they make sense, and so somewhere between the vanilla Bach chorales that we in music learn to write in our beginning theory classes and Bach's chorales, there's something that's different there, and it's not just lack of musicianship. I believe it has something to do, at least in part, with the breaking of rules. And in fact, I could write a book on that if I wanted to right now, about the fact that that's the case with every composer.
Mhm.
That really what we're talking about when we derive rules from things and say this composer wrote with these rules is statistics. We're just saying that there's a very statistically small chance that they'll break that rule.
Mhm.
We don't tell our students that because we know that they'll statistically break those rules. Every measure of every piece that they write. So we tell them it's verboten. It's outlawed to break those rules. But they didn't.
Right. Well, and I remember reading in Xenakis that he was talking about his own use of the computer to determine the probability of events happening, and that
Yes.
he would even break some of those rules occasionally just to
Yes.
get something that was more musical.
Yes.
So it's definitely a theme that that I see in a lot of composers, myself included, that the rules will take you so far, but you do have to know when you can break them.
Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
There's guidelines.
Timing is everything.
I imagine it must have been a balancing act then going through and deciding or like setting up the software to choose like when to break rules. is, is that part of the AMI system?
No, it's actually not. The rules break themselves. Fundamentally, the core of the ME system is what you've mentioned before, Ben. I think voice leading, how to get from one chord to the next chord.
Okay.
If you know what each note of a chord moves to which note, and just remember that, then you can create a new Bach chorale by, say, starting on a chord and saying the next chord has to be this. But that next chord can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to come from the same chorale that it started, otherwise that would produce the same chorale. So since there are so many chords that are the same in Bach chorales, since there are so many chords in Bach chorales, thousands and thousands, it can choose another chord, which itself might go someplace else than the original. You follow me? The third chord will be different than the third chord of the original chorale because of these choices we have between these same chords, and thus the breaking of the rules, since they're in the database itself, appear in the outcome naturally and in proper position within a phrase, and in proper position in relationship to the chords around them, and thus the breaking of the rules is not something the program does at all. Bach does it in his own music by this process I call recombination, because fundamentally EMI is a recombinatory algorithm in that you know the chord-to-chord information is always exact, but the actual ending up phrase is not, because there are choices to be made between the same chord occurring in, chorale number 2 is in chorale number 6, 17, 27, 301, what have you. And there are so many chords in so many chorales that, there are thousands of chords, and so generally speaking, there are, I would say 30 choices. That is 30 exact same chords that exist in the Bach chorales overall, but most of the time go to different chords, each of them. So you're led into different tracks. The music goes in different ways than it did originally. But all of the mistakes, you might want to call them, they certainly weren't to Bach, but they are to the way we teach today, are taking it to a different way, as if Bach did them. I mean, there's simply nothing but Bach there. Mm-hmm. In other words, the output is Bach. It's just Bach rearranged. It's Bach ordered in a different way, following all the rules that Bach used. There's no reason why he wouldn't have composed any of these chorales that EMI produced. Mm-hmm. I know that's a rather damning thing to say, I suppose, to your listeners, but it's true. I'm sure Bach, were he around today, would agree with that.
Well, I've talked with previous guests on the show about their use of Markov chains in analysis composition, and it seems that you could kind of do this by creating a large enough Markov chain as well. That if you had a 30 ordered Markov chain for every chord, that you could essentially produce something similar to EMI's results, or would that be taking this a little
right? But I don't think you'd want a 30th ordered.
Right.
Maybe order 6 or something. But okay. I teach Markov chains routinely in my courses, and I've come to believe that literally everything we do in life can be considered a Markov chain. It's a way to describe things mathematically that is wonderfully beautiful. So EMI certainly is and could be described as a Markov chain. No question about it. It has some slight deviations. It's more or less of an nth order Markov chain in the sense that the orders are changing each time a decision is made based on a number of factors, usually the form. The form at the top is regulating the length of phrases and the fact that they all end on certain chords and certain keys and so forth. And this process is very Markovian, but not a set, not a second order or a third order, but I call again an nth order, which means it varies all the time. If you're close to a cadence, it's a very low order. Mm-hmm. If you're near the first of a phrase, it's more or less an nth order. It could be 10th order, it could be 5th order or something. And again, the higher the order, unfortunately, the more something's going to sound like the original, right. and so therefore, you want to keep the order lower. But nonetheless, it's a Markov chain. You're exactly right.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about the technical aspects of EMI? What did you program this in?
I program exclusively in Lisp. I know a number of languages, and have used them in a variety of ways, and nothing has pleased me more than using Lisp. Okay. The oldest language besides, I guess, Fortran a couple of others, but is in continual use.
Mhm.
And it's, non-Lisp users predict its demise regularly, but it's been around since the late 50s and continues to thrive. I'm on a number of Lisp groups online, and believe me, there's a continual great interest. And the interest lies specifically in the fact that fundamentally, Lisp is not written to do any particular thing. It is written as a prototyping language, a high-level language, and does so in ways that, even after all these years, works wonderfully well. It is a terrible language to use to bring to the shelf of your favorite computer store. You'd never want to write directly, but so usually you prototype the entire thing in Lisp and then write the program or the app or whatever that you're working on in another language. You know, you know, move to a different. There's another word I want to use there. What's the word? Uh,
Different
well,
platform. Or...
Porting.
yeah, well, move to a different platform. Don't worry about the word. Yeah, move to a different platform to get the speed that you need and the low level things, because Lisp does it can do low level things, but it's terrible at it. You're just writing up there in the cloud someplace when you use Lisp, but it's a great language.
Well, and I've seen a lot of the development in artificial intelligence has primarily been in Lisp.
Oh yes, it was, at least when I started to learn it back in the late 70s. The Lisp of choice, or the Lisp of choice, the language of choice amongst AI researchers, and to some degree it still is.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a Freudian Lisp right there.
Yep.
Nice.
Very good, quick and good. That's what you want.
I wouldn't say good. Now, so Emmy was able to produce all of these Bach pieces. Did you use it for other composers' styles as well?
Yes.
And what did you
Any
notice about how it approached different composers?
Well, the idea was that originally, when I was trying to work it for my opera, I just didn't. I couldn't get anything worthwhile from it. So I envisioned this program that would, in fact, you'd be able to take a database and compose something from it, and then switch databases. So the minute I got through with the Bach, the next database that I created was a Cope database, and sure enough, out came material that was I felt just perfect for the opera. I was a little ashamed of the fact that after listening to my music produced by the computer, it pointed out several composers whom I borrowed from in my style, which was a little embarrassing. Although I will state I chose the best composers to choose from in my estimation.
Well, there you go.
And so I had I believe I have changed my style a bit according to what Emmy's output was. But I went to that. I went to myself. But there was so I completed the opera in my style. So there was a Bach database, and then there was a Cope database. But I kept continuing to get these reviews and people wanting to produce the music, play the music, perform the music for audiences, to bring audiences in and to get them excited and depressed and, well, all manner of emotions as a result. So the next one I went to was Chopin. I had to go to composers who wrote lots of music in a particular genre. So, for example, Chopin's Mazurkas, of which he wrote, depending on who you speak to, in the 50s number, was a good number if you write 50-something. I stayed away from Beethoven because he wrote 9 symphonies, for example. 32 is a pretty good number for piano sonatas, but they're all so different it's hard to, so didn't go to Beethoven. But went on to a number of other composers that wrote lots of one thing, so I could get lots of data for that one thing. In fact, I ended up with 35 composers, of which Scott Joplin was present because I consider him a more or less classical composer. He'd been dead long enough that I could use it So, including Scott Joplin and his rags. There weren't that many rags, but enough to make enough diversity for output. It worked pretty well. But the composers went all over the map, from Robert Schumann to Tchaikovsky to contemporary composers of various types, and Vivaldi, etc., etc.
In your exploration with different composers, did you find that any composer or any style produced more musical results using the same amount of data, or did any of the styles seem to work better, or put out something more interesting after going through EMI?
You know, that question has never been asked to me before, and that's quite amazing, since a lot of questions have been asked to me. So I'm going to have to think about it for a second. I mean, some composers, yes. I would have to say that Mozart worked just fine, and Vivaldi works just fine. And all I can attest it to is, all I can, credit that to is the fact that they wrote lots of things in the same genre, in the same type of music. Vivaldi in the 600s and Mozart in the 600s, and lots of things. Lots of piano sonatas, lots of, in the case of Mozart, and certainly lots of concertos. I mean, there are 4 albums of cello concertos by Vivaldi.
Yeah.
4 albums of cello concertos. Nobody's come close to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of data, I suppose. Yeah,
it's a lot of data. So so Vivaldi was something that was quite easy and came out sounding like Vivaldi. Probably more than any other composer sounded like themselves out. Vivaldi was really easy. Mozart as well. Beethoven, very difficult.
interesting.
It took a long time, and it took 20 years before I even began to think of tackling that.
Mm-hmm. And then with your own music, when EMI gave you, I guess, its output and the rules of what you had done, I know you mentioned that you were surprised with the amount of or similarities to other composers and stuff, but were there any of the rules, did they surprise you about your own music as you were using it to compose?
No, the rules didn't, but the fact that the rules had been, what was the old line by Picasso? Good composers borrow, great composers steal. And then Stravinsky said, what was it? I agree with Picasso, but he borrowed that statement from me, which is quite a funny little twist. I think actually it was, now that I think of it, it was the other way around. I think it was, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's funny though.
Yeah.
But it was my shock that I sounded like Ligeti, a composer whose music I love, and I had apparently borrowed. I say borrowed. I'd rather think that I stole material from him more. I mean, I don't mind borrowing a little, but it was more than I thought.
Right.
And I felt a little embarrassed about that.
Yeah, and I've got a question from our producer, Dave. When you use these artificial intelligence programs to compose your own music, do you do a lot of modifications after the fact after what EMI puts out, or do you just let it go as is, or?
I can do that. With my own music, I feel I have the right to do that. With the other ones, I treat them more as scientific experiments. And therefore, I do my damnedest to make as few changes as possible. None, sure. if possible. But my own music, I can do that. And in some cases, I've made a lot of changes. In the first work it produced, called after the opera, called Horizons for Orchestra, I made no changes whatsoever, absolutely none. But not because I was against making those changes. It was simply because I liked the music the way it was. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly enough, it was a very interesting experience. I conducted the first performance, and when I went to the first rehearsal to make I had not heard the piece before, except
wow.
in MIDI, which was just terrible. So I had no idea what was going to happen. And the students, of course, were such that I didn't really tell them how it was composed. I just said I composed it. And in those days, I was not particularly known amongst the students as a algorithmic composer, and so I conducted it, and I was just thrilled with the result, even though it was, it was a first rehearsal and was pretty bad. I could hear the music coming through, and I didn't change a thing, not a damn note. But there have been pieces since then that EMI has produced in my style, in which I've changed plenty of notes, simply because I thought the music should go a different direction than it went in music. But not at the micro level, not at the rule level, if you will, more at the macro level of I'm here, and I want to be over here in 2 minutes from now, and over there isn't where EMI took the piece. Okay. At that particular point, though, I must admit, as I recollect, when that occurred, I just started over again and wrote and just had EMI do a whole new piece. I intended more to do that than spend all of, the whole idea is to write more music. Not the whole idea, but certainly one of the ideas behind EMI for me is I can get music done faster than I could otherwise, and therefore get on to the next piece, and maybe develop new styles by putting variants of my music in and see how they react, something you couldn't do in the past because it took too long to do it. You'd have to, write it all out with quill and dip ink, and then find an orchestra to play it for you and say, oops, that was a failure. Well, that may take a year. Now it takes, a few seconds to do the very same thing, and therefore it's something I want to take advantage of. And I've forgotten what question started. I tried, but
well, sort of tangential to that, are there aspects of pieces that you don't give over to the AI, like dynamics or articulations, that you reserve the right to do the final edits of before you take the piece to the orchestra?
Absolutely. Tempo, dynamics, articulation are the primary ones that are finishing touches. I tend not to do that with EMI with other composers. I mean, because many of those other composers didn't use them themselves. I mean, didn't use crescendos and diminuendos. They were part of performance practice, and so I don't use them there. In Cope, however, I can sometimes for a whole piece just disregard what the program tells me to do and do something else entirely.
I imagine it's probably a great way to come up with ideas at the very least, though. Something to bounce off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's great. In fact, I just can't imagine doing anything any other way, and I'm so happy, as I get older, that I made that decision I did when I did it, because I've been able to compose a great deal more music that I like and feel very, very good about. I mean, a great deal more music, because I was a very slow composer previously, and I've sped up, thousands of times since my earlier days, and with better results as far as I'm concerned.
Now, EMI was later succeeded by another program, Emily Howell.
Yes.
What are the main differences between the two of those?
Well, in 2003, having gotten so many people trying to get me to get EMI to finish Schubert's unfinished symphony, Mahler's 10th, and so forth. That and I was a composer, so I finally decided to mothball the program. I didn't kill the program because I spent too much time building it. So what I decided to do was kill all the databases, because that was a difficult time. Even with MIDI, you can have one bad piece in the thing, and it will mess everything up completely. So
I don't know if I'd have the heart to let go of all that data.
yeah, well, it was made easier by the fact that I knew that if I had changed my mind a month later, it was all available to me online.
Sure.
I'd have to check it all for mistakes, but it was all available to me online. So I just dumped every single copy I had of every single note I'd. What was really hard is all those notes that I put in by hand in the early days. I had to throw those away. But sometimes you have to make hard decisions. So I did that, and I mothballed Emmy, and went back to my composing, not by hand, still algorithmically, but more or less on the fly algorithmically. During that time, actually before I even mothballed Emmy, I had a different idea of a program that, pretending Emmy now was, I mean, I often refer to her as she. So in this case, I pretended Emmy, as a she, had a child. And that this child was going to take composing lessons from Emmy in a way that would place her in a position of copying, as European composers have for centuries, her mother's work, but at the same time trying to inject something of her own into it. So what I created was a program named Emily Howell, and the name is simple. Howell is my middle name, and so that linked it to me. And Emily is a version of Emmy. If you look it up, you'll find that Emily is one of the names that associates well with Emmy. So Emily Howell became the name. I actually started working on Emily Howell maybe in the 90s. So it was well before Emmy had been mothballed. And the point was for Emily, the daughter of Emmy, to use only Emmy's output as data and use mixed composers so that the output of Emily Howell would be new styles. In other words, the direct opposite of what Emmy was supposed to do. Emmy was supposed to emulate style as it existed and try to discover more and new things about composers' style. Emily's point was to take many different compositions from, well, they weren't direct compositions from composers, but secondhand music from her mother's work in styles, place them together in a database, have the database produce a set of rules. It doesn't quite work like that. It works differently than Emmy, but I don't know if you want to get into that. So I'll just say that it's similar in ways enough that it makes sense, and then produce new music. And so the first Emily Howell album that occurred, that came out some years ago now. I don't really remember the date, or even the year, but quite a while now, was filled with music that was attempting to create music in styles nobody had heard before. And she's about ready to come out with her third album, probably within the next 6 months or so.
Wonderful.
So that's the long and the short of it with Emily Howell.
I particularly enjoyed listening to From Darkness, Light.
Yeah, from Darkness to Light. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a really nice piece of music.
Yeah, that's for two pianos, and was Opus 1, the first piece she came out with, and yeah, it's gotten some play on the internet. I've noticed by people putting it up there. I'm sure not that the record company's not happy. with that, but people do listen to it quite a bit. If I can remember YouTube's numbers, it does seem to have gotten people's attention, and for that I'm pleased.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, could you talk a little bit about the critics' reaction to these pieces, though?
Negative. Negative. Absolutely negative. It's very, very difficult to find. I found one recent published critique, I guess, of it, review of it, and it was quite good, except the fact that it completely ignored the fact that it was computer composed, didn't mention the word computer in it at all,
Right.
talked about it was music written by a human being, which was quite interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the reviewer knew that it was that, but and so I give him kudos for taking the music and judging it on its own, and not giving the reader any idea that a computer had composed it, and that for me was a high point. I really liked that, but most of the rest of them were negative, and were brutally negative. I mean, brutally negative. I mean, the first real review I got of Emmy of a concert done was the fact that a review was written and published, a very negative review, 2 weeks before the concert occurred. Now you might find that a little strange, but it was not an accident. The person was arguing against the fact that a concert should take place at all, that this was disgusting and horrible. I actually enjoyed the review so much, I called the reviewer and offered him free tickets to the concerts when they occurred.
Yeah.
But he refused. He refused to go and stuck by his negative reviews. And I could spend the rest of the day telling you reviewers. It's quite an interesting position to be in. And I can only thank my mother, who was my first reviewer, and very, very negative, until the only way I could survive it was to enjoy the negativity of the reviews and sort of say, "Ooh, that was particularly bad. Thank you, mother."
Yeah.
That I read the reviews if they're put in front of me, and laugh and enjoy them, and I can tell you that those reviewers would be unhappy to note that they turn me on to work even harder at what I'm doing. They don't turn me off at all. So I'm kind of lucky in that regard that I have this. It's not insensitivity to bad reviews. It's a positive sensitivity that actually makes me want to work harder and do different things. And if I'm in a doldrum, I'll actually try to look online or ask people if they know if they've seen a recent review that I could read that was particularly negative, so I can get back on track again, because I'm losing the energy that those negative reviews give me.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to use a negative review as fuel for creativity.
Yes.
And
Yes.
It's interesting hearing you say. I think earlier in the interview you mentioned that in teaching, you seem to use the same relationship of making critical minds angry.
Yes, I think that's very part. I mean, they're not angry, but they're very confused and pissed off.
Very
and
challenged,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah.
Challenged, and that's a better word to use. And I think that's my job. And even though I'm 73, I'll be teaching a composition course this spring at the university, and graduate composition course. And I'm that's still 2 months away, but I'm thinking of all the things I can do to make this course as controversial and as conflicting as possible.
Yeah.
Not just so the students will remember, but because they'll have to make decisions. I'm going to put them on the spot and make statements that I believe that will piss them off incredibly. And we're not going to, we do music, but that will get them thinking about something they've not thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that is my job.
Well,
It sounds
iconoclastic thinking has always been fun
Yeah.
in some ways.
It rather reminds me of a professor that Ben and I had in common at
Yes.
Michigan State, right?
Not me, I
Very
hope.
much so.
No, in a very positive way.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But speaking of teaching, one of the each year I've gotten one of the flyers for this program, but I haven't been able to attend. But your workshop in algorithmic computer music at UC Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very intriguing program. Could you tell us a little about this?
Yeah, it's a 2-week immersive program. That is, we go from about 9 in the morning until well after midnight with short breaks for meals. 7 days a week for 2 weeks. We teach them Lisp and force them to, not force them, but
Forcefully
they have,
encourage.
encouraged with detonation. Implied, I guess, that they actually complete a project in Lisp by the end of the 2 weeks. And we have 4 dedicated people very much involved, and Larry Polanski, Daniel Brown, and Peter Elzey, and myself are there with the students. We only allow 15 students into it. It's called WACM, Workshop in Algorithmic Computer Music. And this is our 13th year, and we're almost sold out in January. So if you happen to change your mind, you better get your application in. It's amazing. I thought it might be, partially attended over the years, but it's been wonderfully attended and with very interested people, ages 18 to 85. Many faculty, with PhDs in teaching composition at other universities, to people who work in different fields, chemists who are just interested in if the principles can be adapted to their own fields. So it's been a rewarding thing, and every year I look forward to it with great zeal. Although it's as tiring for me as it is for the students, because a great deal of the time is spent one-on-one with students, helping them with situations. We guarantee that we do classes for about 8 hours a day, and the rest of the time is and any student who has any problem is going to have a faculty member at their side helping them solve it immediately.
Sounds like such an amazingly engaging program, and I can only imagine the range of what the projects that might have come out of people taking these courses. And
yes, they're quite diverse.
Yeah,
and they're both analysis as well as composition. But the most popular is people who want to write programs that produce Philip Glass music.
Sure.
And believe me, some of them have been damn good. I mean, really quite impressive. Philip may walk in and say, "Oh my God, I must have done that sometime, but I don't remember ever having composed it. What's it called?" Sort of thing.
That's amazing.
But many others.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I know you. I've forgotten even what I was going to say.
No, I was just gonna joke that I hear Philip Glass is likely gonna make the film score for the next Avengers movie. So I wonder if Marvel Studios or whatever is gonna get wind of this software and maybe undercut.
Well, the software is probably a lot cheaper than hiring Phil Glass. So
yeah, drastically different fee.
It might be, yes. Who knows?
Well, and on that subject, I've had a lot of fun playing around with things like Pandora and the Music Genome project, where it will pick similar styled songs for you to listen to. But have you ever thought of commercializing Emmy or Emily as an app or as a web-based service so that you can have new pieces constantly on demand in the style of a particular composer?
Yeah, very early on, I would say in the late 80s, I flirted with a company that will go unnamed about doing this kind of thing. Um, it just so happened that at the time we were involved with negotiations, there was a fall in the stock market, shall we say. In other words, the things went south on the company for reasons completely unrelated to my negotiations, and they suddenly couldn't work anymore. And it was at that point that I realized that entering the world of commercial things was a different world than I was used to teaching. So I decided to reveal the program in all of its detail in books instead. So I wrote 5 books on Emmy and Emily Howell, which fundamentally say, in fact, maybe even too repetitively tell how the program works in detail. And a couple of them have, well, one of them in particular, Experiments in Musical Intelligence, is the title. It actually has a CD-ROM with a version of Emmy, a sort of bulletproof version. I mean, Emmy itself is about 20,000 lines of code, which it's on the move. It's being changed all the time, or at that point in time, it was being changed daily to fix certain bugs, to just little things. But when people talk about a program, it was not frozen in time. It was like most people's code when they're writing. It's always changing. And so when I say bulletproof, I mean it's not going to break. It's got So that was called Sarah. Simple Analytical Recombinatory Algorithm.
Nice.
Was the acronym for it. And so Sarah is still available on that CD-ROM. But I decided to not go the commercial route at that point. I went for the teaching route. And so I don't know. I don't even know how many books now that I've written in general, or articles, for example, which must be in the hundreds, on algorithmic music in general, and certainly Emmy and Emily Howell in particular. And there would be no reason for me to go commercial now, because anybody else who wants to can go commercial. The real problem here with commerciality, though, is a rather interesting one, and that is that the idea is I assume is that most people who would buy a commercial product like this would be really interested in doing pop music, or doing rock music, or doing imitating one of their favorite groups, or what have you. And it just so turns out that that proposition isn't as interesting as it might first seem. That pop groups and rock groups and so forth, have a sound that's not so much in the notes as it is in the singers, as it is in the lyrics, as it is in live performance with half-dressed people, banging large, mostly wooden penises. Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you reading from Frank Zappa's book right now? I mean, he has an entire chapter that has a lot of those critiques of modern pop music.
Yeah, but I'm not against any music. Trust me, I'm really not. I truly believe there's great music in every field that it can possibly be. I am open-minded, but that sort of that came out by its own accord, not through mine. So possibly my alter ego has some problems with certain types of music, but yeah, I did the Beatles, not professionally. I didn't make them available to anybody, but and people said they didn't sound like the Beatles. Well, of course they didn't sound like the Beatles. There were MIDI coming out,
Yeah.
and it didn't have Ringo playing drums, and it didn't have Paul singing or John, and it didn't have the crowds cheering. It didn't have it just isn't the same thing. And so it really is a program that is relegated to music with notes on paper, as codified by 400 or 500 years of classical music tradition. It works there, but doesn't work in other areas. And then you run the risk of suit. I mean, nobody has, in fact, attempted to. Imagine a person saying, "I'm going to write a new piece of music, but I really like the way the Beatles sound, so I'm going to make it sound like the Beatles. I'm going to do a lot of their changes and stuff, but I'm going to write new lyrics, and I'm going to do all sorts of other things." Well, I can't imagine that would make the surviving Beatles very happy. And because they have a lot of money, it might make them even wish to sue, because and so you're in a whole new area here of litigation that I didn't want to face. So I destroyed the Beatles database, and aside from the fact that one group, which still exists but was very popular more or less in the 70s than it is today, asked for it, and so I had EMI produce a fair amount of music in their style, and then because I've also branched out into lyrics, not lyrics, into words, did the words for it as well, and they were very pleased with the results. But that was a unique circumstance. They didn't sue. They didn't even pay, because I was intrigued enough by my own self, so just to ask me. I mean, it was a group you recognize the name of. I was so pleased they did that in fact I was happy to do it for nothing, just to hear them sing the music, and it was fun. But then we had to destroy the music. I had to destroy every copy I had, because they didn't want it to get loose, as it were.
Interesting. Was that material then released as their own music, or was the whole project?
I'm unable to say.
Okay. Gotcha.
Understand.
As simple as that. I'm unable to say. I've signed certain documents that what I've said is about all I can say.
Well, that's a wildly interesting proposition. I mean, so where you use it to have the pitch and duration content, but then you add in all of the other details that make it the composition that gets performed by live players.
In my case, I do in my own music. That's not the case necessarily in all. It's the case in some of EMI's music of other composers, but not all.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
Yeah, but it seems like such a wonderful tool just for generating any kind of part of the compositional process for making any kind of music. Yeah.
I completely agree, but it's not useful in the pop world, because there's it just doesn't work. I mean, because pop world is not notes and durations particularly. In fact, often they're the same between songs.
Sure.
The blues. I mean, how many chord changes do we have that are wildly new? None. Might be an answer. I'm sure there are some, but it's not where the action is. The action is in other parts. It's in the lyrics. It's in the performers. For heaven's sakes, it's in the performers. We listen to them. We don't, And by the way, how often do we ask who composed that particular piece of popular music. Half the time we don't know,
Yeah.
or we suppose that the singer does, but most of
Right.
the time the singer doesn't. And those composers are making their money, but they're most of them, a lot of them are never heard of. We know the Beatles composed theirs, and we respect them highly because of it. It makes them kind of special. But if you think of your favorite pop song, who wrote it? And,
Right.
and I don't know how that necessarily, works its way into how difficult it is for a program like the two that I've built. Actually, the two that have become popular that I've built. That I've built many more that have not. But it's just a whole different ballgame with pop music,
Mhm.
and it could be done, but by a different program that I'd ever create.
Yeah.
Now, just as a follow-up to that, are there any composers of classical or pop that you are dying to run through the database process? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering what would happen if you put the Robert Johnson 27 songs into Emily's input, if that would come out with something that could have been, or
Yes.
Yeah,
I think so. It could have been, and not would have been, but could have been.
right.
I would hope so. I can't imagine it wouldn't, but yeah.
Yep. But any other composers that you're dying to build a style database of?
Were I to unmothball Emmy, you mean?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
Boy, I've never been asked that question before. I yeah, I think there are certain classical composers certainly that I would have. I think I missed, and I missed my bet. Tchaikovsky being one, um, Dvorak being another. These are just composers that I think that might work. In terms of contemporary composers, well, I I don't know that of contemporary classical or stage composers that I know of that I would particularly be interested in doing. Pop music, uh, uh, to the amount that I know, oh yes, there are a great many that I think would be really fun to do if in fact I added a lyric component and I had a deal with the group that they would actually perform them in some way. I would love to do that, absolutely. But no one has approached me, and I don't think they will. Movies, I've done a movie, a film, and there have been a few opportunities, all of which failed to materialize. But that interests me greatly because my entire family has been involved in filmmaking on both sides, both my mother's and father's sides, uh, since my very since before I was born, and I'm a movie addict, and I literally watch one a day, um, and the fact that Emmy or Emily Howe could participate in that in some way would be great. Although I think they probably are anyway, not by my program, but by others, just not getting credit for it. I mean, most movies now, the soundtracks are not by real orchestras; they're by sampled orchestras, as you probably already know. We just don't. We aren't aware of it when we see the composer's name, if anybody bothers to even look. But I do at the end, and knowing some of them as I do, uh, I could, but won't name the ones that are, were in fact orchestrated and in part algorithmically composed by computers. So they're smart enough. The movie companies are smart enough not to advertise that because they've seen what's happened to me in particular, but probably others as well. In terms of negativity, they don't want to, start a riot about the film score.
Sure.
They'd much rather get high reviews and lots of money from the actual film. And why let the score boggle your mind?
We we've got another show on our network called Streamers and Punches. Our fellow composers Bill Witham and Kevin Wilt talk about film scoring. And they do a monthly show like this too. I'll have to talk to them about algorithmic composing if they've
Yeah.
Yeah.
how much they've run across that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me a natural.
Absolutely, right. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many common devices and common instrumentation that happen in films and stuff. There's a real place for it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we put people out of work,
Right.
but that's going to happen no matter what form of music you're going to work with.
Sure.
And that's usually the biggest complaint about it. And my response to that is people are going to be put out of work with any kind of technological advance. And
I mean,
what we're not doing as a society is offering re-education to new jobs. I mean, all we need is those people to run those machines, and nobody would be out of work.
mhm.
You know?
I know this whole discussion has been timely in a bunch of different ways. I've been seeing so many articles talking about like singer-songwriters and in the pop world, some really high-level ones discussing about who writes the songs and what like the veil behind which there's
Right.
them often or other people doing all the work, and
Yeah.
then also the role of computers in our society with the balance between having them be made and used to remove human work or to enhance human work.
Yeah, there was a very acerbic article about who's really playing the drums on
Yeah.
your favorite records. Was that
Right.
Sound on Sound or Tape Op?
I don't know, but
One of those guys.
yeah, it's cool to see how this discussion has been developing, and it's I personally haven't spent too much time in the algorithmic uh, land of composing. I've been experimenting with some like pure data building environments that use different statistics and samples
Right.
to generate something in a certain style, but not taking something and using it as an analytical and then compositional tool. That's a really intriguing thing. But,
Yeah, I think so. I think it's as natural that we should want to do it and be curious about it as we are naturally curious about anything, rather than being prematurely negative about it, as most people seem to be.
mhm.
But then again, I wouldn't be so happy if they weren't antagonistic. So
Well, I think the times are finally changing. A couple of people at Carnegie Mellon recently released a set of tools for machine learning in MaxMSP and Pure Data, and the comments on
great.
that have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, I think things are changing. I was just mentioning to somebody in the last couple of weeks about how just in the last month I've received all kinds of examples of new programs that are now being made available for free for algorithmic composing, and these are the types of programs which are open-ended. I mean, what I fear is programs that algorithmic composing programs that offer you what the maker thinks is the right way to do things.
Mm.
And what we really need is programs that that fundamentally are like Lisp in the sense that they don't offer you anything; they offer you everything by not saying you can only do this. And I'm seeing those programs now. I'm hearing the words more likely. I'm seeing the enrollment in having to turn people away in Wacom, the workshop we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the last 6 months, literally that quickly, things are moving in a direction that I can't believe, and it makes me incredibly happy. I mean, it used to be that at the ICMC, the International Conference on Computer Music, no, that's not right, International Computer Music Conference, that's it, that the few of us, maybe 2 or 3 of us, who were interested in algorithmic music would be put off on a panel, usually ill-attended, and that was it. We were just given a spot. and then I would write an article or two every year for the journal, Computer Music Journal. And now I find that things are starting to change, and I am really gratified because I think this is, computers making what we've been doing with all of the sounds and so forth that computers have created is create a new musical instrument, which computers were incredible at. There's no question about that. And we've made certain attributes of surround sound and, well, hundreds of other little devices. But it seems to me that the computer is a composer's helper, a composer's. I mean, it seems to me we've been missing the real guts of what computers can do. It's fun to have new instruments, but we've had new instruments being created all the time. I mean, the violin had to be created at some point, so did the cello, and they usually had lutes and other instruments along the way.
Yeah.
That's terrific, but there's nothing new about making a new instrument. But actually making an instrument that automatically creates new music is something that is technologically extraordinary, and it's confused me up until now that we have sort of avoided that, when in fact we should have been actually pouncing on it.
It makes me wonder where this path will go. Like, what's next as we get to develop new instruments and change the way that people use computers to compose music and stuff.
Right.
And isn't that great? Isn't that
It
fabulous
is.
to not know?
Yeah.
It is just incredible. We live in an exciting age in history, and I can't tell you. At 73, you start beginning to think of, well, I'm on the downside of things. But all I want to be, I'd like to be 3 now, so I could enter this age, because if we don't blow ourselves off the map, this is an extraordinary time.
Yeah.
When 12-year-olds can bring down Sony.
Right.
And I'm still betting that those were 12-year-olds because they work with the stuff. They know it really, really well, better than 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds who didn't have the access to the open source and the number of computer languages to use. I mean, our 12-year-olds are smarter than hell. I mean, they are just absolutely amazing. Just using their thumbs to write messages amuses me and amazes me at the same time. I can't believe it. I'm a little too old to have the dexterity with my thumbs to do that, I think, or at least maybe my thumbs are just too damn big. I don't know what the problem is, but I can't quite manage that one yet. But to be serious, the technological side is just an extraordinary point in the history of humankind, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and thank you so much for your contributions and exploring this with us. I think I think we've reached the part of our interview, or part of the show, where Ben, I think, is going to take on some special topic in the 2-minute challenge.
Oh, I can't wait to see this. I hope I get to see it. Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I want to see this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure, and we'll
definitely.
We'll talk more in a second. So Ben, what are you going to talk about this month?
Well, I am going to talk about noise.
What?
Exactly.
See what I did there?
I did.
Been waiting for an hour for that.
God.
No. So unfortunately, I had some examples prepped and ready to go in Super Collider. For some reason, it's not playing nice with the internet.
I think it's a Google Hangout thing. I think Google Hangouts is designed to not let noise happen, which we probably want most of the time, to be honest. So.
Right. So fortunately, Dave has samples of the different types of noise that I'm going to talk about. Exactly. And we can add those in post, so I'm just going to talk.
Tell me when you want me to play them. I got the Wikipedia articles queued up, man. I'm good to go.
Well, I am going to say the name of every type of noise except for white, So just as soon as we start this up, fire off the white noise and play it behind me.
Ben, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you like really, really ready?
I'm really, really ready.
Okay. Hit it.
Okay, so for most of us, noise is sort of like Potter Stewart's definition of obscenity. I know it when I see it, or in this case, it's I know it when I hear it. Noise is essentially a non-periodic signal. It's a bunch of random stuff happening in a waveform that is not repeated. So what this means is that it's a more complicated randomness than it first appears. Effectively, if you look at this through a spectrogram, it exhibits some really interesting features in that you have basically every frequency occurring simultaneously, and in terms of white noise, all of these frequencies have the exact same volume at the same time. But just as there are more than one types of color, there's also more than one types of noise. So pink noise, in that all frequencies are present, but this time there's a huge change in volume. So pink noise, you have octave bands where all the frequencies have the same amount of power, but then they gradually taper off by about 3 decibels. So it has a more bassy response. Brown noise is going to be very similar, except it's a 6 dB taper after every successive octave. So it sounds more like a roaring waterfall. And finally, we have gray noise, which is effectively white noise equalized to deal with the biological hardware fault that is the human ear. So the ear doesn't actually hear all frequencies at the same volume at the same time. It's more focused towards higher frequencies. Gray noise applies a psychoacoustic curve, giving a bass boost, a mid-cut, and then just a little bit of a boost to the upper end so that it sounds like everything is actually equalized. All of these types of noise can be used to create really cool textures, as modulation sources, or to control parameters in your favorite software. Keep in mind, there's other types as well. These are simply the most common ones.
I think you have a couple seconds to spare. There goes the alarm. You nailed it. Well done, Ben.
Quick explanation of noise. Like I said, there's a lot more. Check out red noise. It's basically the opposite of pink noise in that it increases every octave band by 3 decibels. And there's others that are specific to different programming languages like clip noise and super.
This feels like cheating. You continuing to explain noise.
I am cheating, yes. I'm breaking the rules. We said that was okay earlier today.
I suppose. And it looks like Nate had a connection problem, so you might have to wrap up without him.
Okay. Well, I have no idea what happened to Nate. And
oh,
now
here's
Nate's
Nate.
Apparently back.
He just got back. Go ahead and wrap it.
So I'm so disappointed my computer crashed and missed the 2-minute challenge. But Ben, I hope it was wonderful.
I think it was.
Okay.
It was noisy.
Noisy, if nothing else. Yeah, absolutely. Well, David Cope, thank you so much. I don't know if Ben already said this, but thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such an engaging conversation.
Well, thank you. You asked some very interesting questions, and at least a couple of them I've never been asked before. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Well, thanks.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. We look. I guess at the end of the show, we like to ask you if you have any events coming up or anything you'd like to plug. I know there's the workshop this summer, and you mentioned a class that you're teaching as well. Do you have any other things you'd like to send people to so we can find out more about what you do?
Well, I may have told you that in the last month I got not only the flu but 2 different types of pneumonia, one double, an extremely high heart rate, and arrhythmia, all happening at once to the point where doctor gave me 1 chance in 20 to live. I fooled him once again. I'm still alive and doing well, but I've had to cancel a lot of things that I really wanted to do because I'm under, well, I should say that every day I look forward to some kind of blood being drawn in some way to make sure that, I don't know, Dracula's happy or whatever. But there is the workshop this summer, and God, what else? I do interviews, not like this one, but interviews, mostly radio or for magazines, generally once a week or so, and enjoy those immensely. Not out of any ego, but because I'm pleased to have my work, mean something to people enough that they would like to hear what I have to say. The third album, as I mentioned before, of Emily Howe will be out in the spring sometime, I hope, and it's called Alive, with a exclamation point after it, and I'll leave you with that thought.
Okay.
It's of the three, it's certainly the most controversial.
In the Dr. Frankenstein sense of alive.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah.
Well, again, I hope your health continues to hold up, and yeah, thank you so much. For fortunate to get to talk with you and have this conversation.
My pleasure as well.
Yeah. And so we'll have links to each of the things that we talk about, or that we talked about in this show, and the future things that you mentioned in our show notes. We post those show notes at soundnotion.tv/pi, where we've got archive of all of our patch-in episodes. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you to our listeners and supporters for continuing to support patch-in and soundnotion.tv. You can find this podcast and our other podcasts on the soundnotion.tv network in the iTunes store or in whatever kind of podcatcher device app you might use on your phone or other device. It's a regular podcast, accessible by any means. Please support our show and all of our shows. We've on soundnotion.tv. We've got a couple places you can donate. We've also got an Amazon search link where you can, like, if you need to buy something on Amazon, just search for it through that, and then we get a little bit of a kickback if you actually purchase it by getting to it through those means. So, but again, thanks again so much, David Cope, for coming on our show.
Yeah,
my pleasure. Great to meet you guys. You're quite a group, and you have brains up there. Let me tell you, compared to a lot of interviewers. I'm an interviewee. That's right. You're the interviewers. You're fabulous.
Well,
thank you.
Really appreciate the compliment. Yeah, we're all composers too, and so it's such a privilege to get to talk to some of the greats like yourself.
Well, I don't know about great, but I am one.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. This has been another episode of Patch In. And yeah, my name's Nate Blyton.
Okay,
I'm Ben
Nate.
Furman.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks again, David Cope. So yeah, thank you, listeners. We'll see you again next month.
All right, we're out. Thank you, everyone.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.